I'm delighted today to have Emma Chichester Clark in the Reading Corner. And I'm sure many people know that after studying graphic design and an early career working in a design studio, acclaimed children's book creator Emma Chichester Clark entered into the children's book world with her debut book, Listen to This, an anthology of short stories for reading aloud. For this book, in 1988, she was awarded the Mother Goose Award for Best Newcomers. Since then, she's collaborated with many authors, including Michael Morpurgo. You've probably seen The Pied Piper and Pinocchio, Geraldine McCaughrean for Greek myths and Roman myths, and her former tutor, mentor, and friend, Quentin Blake, for Three Little Monkeys. And I think there are 3 books in that series. She's also written and illustrated her own stories, too many to mention individually, but Blue Kangaroo series, Bears Don't Read, Bunny Wunny. And today in particular, we're going to be talking about her latest book, which is Mister Toots. Welcome into the Reading Corner, Emma.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So I'm just going to say a little bit about Mister Toots. It's a story of this little blue creature with a sort of elf-like hat who one day in a storm arrives on the doorstep of a dog-like creature. In fact, I think the whole world is populated with dogs. This dog is called Bella, and she immediately welcomes Mister Toots into her household. And he soon makes himself part of the family. Tell us a little bit more about the story, though.
Well, the story began quite differently. In fact, Mr. Toots was a little man, a miniature man. He looked a little bit like a banker, like the father of the children in Mary Poppins, in that old film. He looked like that, and he was very small. And I liked the idea of having a little man in a doggy world, but everyone thought it was too peculiar. So he changed. He changed into this creature, which I've made him so that you aren't really sure whether he's an alien or whether he's an elf, gnomey sort of creature. You just don't really know what he is. And the idea of the story was that he was, maybe possibly like a little refugee who needs help, needs home, needs food, needs everything, doesn't speak the same language as the creatures that he's come to visit, and they welcome him with open arms.
I was put in mind of another story that you'll know well, Bigu by Alexis Deason.
Yes.
But unlike that story in which the children welcome Bigu, but the adults don't welcome him into their world, in this story, the whole community rally round. And this little creature impacts the whole community. They're both enriched by his appearance.
Yes, that's true. I'd forgotten all about Bigu, but it's absolutely a huge similarity. But luckily, Mr. Toots has arrived in a doggy world. And as you know, dogs provide unconditional love at all times. So there isn't that thing that humans do. There's just a welcome.
You started talking about a refugee-like story.
Yes.
So my observation here is that we've quickly moved into talking about some of the themes and the ideas that underpin the story. Were they there at the beginning, or did they actually emerge as you were creating the story?
Yes, actually, they did. I mean, originally with the little man, he was lost, and they rescued him and took him in. But when it turned into this little creature, he became kind of more vulnerable and more childlike, and obviously needed more help than the independent little man. And then he became much a part of the community that they lived in. There are all sorts of uncles and aunts and cousins who all fall in love with him. And one day he disappears. He floats away in a bloom that is hanging from a tree. It's obviously his, and he's found it again, and he disappears off into the sky. And the little dog, the two children dogs and the mother are devastated, completely devastated, as are all the friends and aunts and uncles and so on. And so there's a period of grief and mourning for this creature. And then one day he reappears just when they're least expecting it. And he summons them, he drags them out of the house and makes them follow him. And they run and run and run. And there's a great long sort of line of them running and running and running after this creature. And then suddenly you see they all stop in amazement because they see coming out of the sky hundreds and hundreds of these balloons, each one with a basket underneath with a little creature, just like Mister Toots inside it. And rather than being horrified and thinking they're being invaded or whatever, they're all thrilled. And they all think, no, we can all have one too. We can have one each. It's a bit like Madeline, at the end of Madeline, when the dog, Genevieve, has all her puppies, and there's one for each child.
One of the things that I wanted to explore was that your stories are what I would call classic, in the sense that both the visual feels very classic, but also your narrative, your textual narrative feels very classic too. And I did read elsewhere in another interview that you're not a fan of illustration that shows too much technique. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What does that mean?
I think I'm frightened of it rather than not being a fan, because I don't know how to do it, probably. I don't know. I think most illustrators these days know how to do things that I don't know how to do with Photoshop and all those things. I'm mostly like, oh, brilliant. But sometimes I feel that they're a little bit cold and flat and obvious. I quite like there to be a little bit of something held back. I don't want to be given everything. I don't want to have all of it on a plate. I like subtlety, and I really like pictures that show emotion, feeling, and sometimes that can be lost.
There's something very direct between the hand and the material. And when you're talking about, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think when you're talking about the technology, it's there between you and the material. It's another interface.
Yes. I mean, I know it's very useful. And the designer at HarperCollins with this book has done lots of brilliant things, like the way she's faded out a lot of the pictures, because quite a few of them, when I did them like sort of cartoon strips with hard lines around them, and she's pulled bits out and faded the edges and made them into little vignettes. It's really worked. It makes it all much softer and sweeter. I mean, those kind of technical things, and being able to change the colour of a background without having to do it yourself, paint it all out and get paint off and put it on, it all goes blotchy and horrible. And I've got plenty of pages like that. In fact, in the latest Monkey book, the Christmas one, there's a double-page spread where I did the background so many times, even though it already had all the collage stuck on it. And you can see these awful blotches, turquoise blotches, where it's gone wrong. But strangely enough, it doesn't seem to show up that much. I don't immediately go, oh my God, look at that.
Lovely. And do you mix your porridge? Is it mainly with ink?
Well, it's a huge mixture. It's inks, and sometimes it's a bit of gouache, and sometimes it's a bit of acrylic and crayons. And recently I've been doing some oil painting, but I don't know if I could ever do a book with oil painting, but I'd love to. And it made me use different colours, a lot of rich pinks. And I've discovered that you can just go on and on and on, over and over the top. There's nothing to be frightened of, really. I always thought they were frightening. But you can just keep going till you've got it how you want it.
You've started mentioning colour there, and that is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, the colour palette for this book, which seems to be predominantly you've got the blue of Mister Toots and the yellow of the dog. And then background, a lot of background in this very pale green, and then quite a vibrant pink, picking up in things like clothes and so on. Those seem to me to be the four predominant colours. And I'm interested to know whether you get that straight away or whether you have to think about the colour, whether you're going after a particular feeling and it reflects that feeling.
So the yellow, I was very keen on the yellow at the beginning, and I think that's another throwback from Madeline. And actually, from whenever I do a book, I do a mood board first. I do work out what the colours are going to be. I generally go through magazines like Interiors and tear pages out, and I make a collage of colours and patterns and things that I have in front of me, so that I have an idea of the theme for a book. And the yellow dogs had been around for a long time in my head in notebooks, and they're still there. I still want to do more of them. Not necessarily this family, but I can't seem to get away from this yellow dog. So it was just the colours that went with yellow.
And Mister Toots is almost entirely blue, different shades of blue, but he's really a blue character.
I tried different colours with Mister Toots, but if he'd been green, he would have looked like an elf. And if he were pink, he would have looked like a baby. Or red, he would have looked like a little devil. So blue is a kind of peaceful but childlike and sort of serious colour. I couldn't decide about the colour of his face for ages. I thought it was going to be a pink face, but it had to be blue in the end to keep him sort of anonymous.
I want to talk a little bit about the relationship of words and images, because this, as a picture book, it has quite a lot of words in it, doesn't it, this story?
Yeah.
And I thought it might help just to have a look at one or two pages and talk about those together. So I've picked a double-page spread that's close to the beginning of the story, when Mister Toots is welcomed into the family, and we have 5 vignettes, and the text weaves around them. And I just wondered about the relationship of text to image here. How do you decide what part of the story is best told through the words and what part is best told through the pictures?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. It's when he's just arrived and Bella is offering him a glass of water and offering him things to eat, cornflakes and broccoli. And the little creature's dreadfully hungry. And here it's the words are really more important in a way than the pictures, because there's a lot to explain at this point. The fact that he doesn't seem to have eaten anything for a long time or had anything to drink. And then he gobbles it all up. And Bella, looks down at him. He's just staring at her, and she says, "You don't understand a word I'm saying, do you?" And she realises that there's not going to be any communication at all between them. Then the children rush in, and immediately they want to keep him. And at that point, he seems to rather relate to them, because they're about the same size as him, which you can see in the picture. Mm-hmm. He goes, "Toot, toot," and waves his arms, and everyone seems to relax. I think there were more pictures, but they weren't necessary.
Do you draw every day, Emma? Is it something that you have to do?
I think I do, but I don't know that it's that I have to draw. It's more like I have to work. It's a kind of an anxiety, maybe. If I'm not working, I'm feeling slightly anxious. Or if I am not working for a whole day, I have to justify it to myself somehow. But I generally get up, walk the dog, go to work, and stop in the afternoon, walk the dog, go back to work, and go until the end of the Archers. Most days, on an ideal day, that's what I would do.
There's no such thing as retirement for creative people, is there?
Well, no. But I'm not planning to, because I still find it exciting. I find the whole thing of having an idea, that's the best moment, if you have an idea and you've got it cooking in your head. And then it's got to have somewhere to go. So you've got to be able to make a book. You've got to persuade somebody to publish it. And it just goes on and on like that. I can't imagine how to live without having that sort of excitement and something growing in your head.
I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the other pictures in the book. And I wondered if we could talk a little bit about composition and what makes a good picture. So I wanted to start with the picture of them coming together, and the text says, they loved him with all their hearts. And this is when Mister Toots has really become absorbed into the family. And I'm just looking at the way that this family is grouped together and the shape that is around the family and the colours that you've used there. Tell us a little bit about it from your point of view.
Well, I wanted to show, I suppose it's got a little bit of the Virgin and the Child about it, in a way. It's a triangular shape, the three little dogs together. I do think about composition, and I remember learning about composition. It was your eye is supposed to start at the bottom left and go zooming up in a diagonal and then across and then back down. And I try and remember about that, but it never really happens. But I wanted it a bit like a Madonna and Child, with the light behind them and the shadows and the warmth of the colours, just to make it as loving as possible. And then there are three little chairs.
Very soft, isn't it, when the pink goes into more pink?
It blends back into it, yes. Yeah.
And then you've got almost like an egg shape around this. And there's something very cocooning about the egg. It is.
It's eggy and cocoony and woomy, isn't it? Yes, it's a big hug, basically.
And then as you were talking about the triangular, the classical triangular shape, just look at the gaze and the eyes of these characters. The mother's got the eyes closed, and that's
complete,
almost like a reverie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's sort of complete love. Don't even have to look. It's just there in her heart.
It's a beautiful image. I want to go to something that feels very different, and this is later in the story when all the Mister Toots, all of his friends, companions, family, community, they come back in their balloons and they're greeted. We've got a double page spread here, and we've got all of the little blue people running towards this community of dogs. Big space, plenty of space for the text here. This to me seemed like a really clever composition, something that to me would feel very difficult to execute.
Well, it was very tricky because I knew I wanted to be able to see them all at once. So it meant having the dogs with their backs to us, feeling the impact of these little tiny creatures rushing towards us. I think I needed it to contrast with the page before, where you see all the balloons coming down and the dogs are close up, looking up at these little balloons pouring out of the sky. And so the camera comes back a bit, if there were a camera, and you see them all at once, slightly from above. Seeing them from above was the only way really that I could get everyone in and make that space in between them, so that it's the moment before they reach each other. That bit where Heathcliff and Cathy are running across the moor with their arms spread, and it's just that moment before they touch.
Very dynamic. It has got that feeling of movement in it. And listening to you talking about cameras, do you think that, this is going back quite a long way, but do you think because we have photography and film that it has enabled artists to think differently about the way they paint?
Yes, I do think that, because we look at images all the time. And so we're given all sorts of tricks, really. I think at Quentin, I remember him saying how he treats each double page spread as a stage set. with, people coming in from left and right, whatever. And I love the idea of camera angles and zooming in and zooming out. It's very much part of composing a book, because you want each page to be a surprise. You don't always want to be at the same angle. You don't always want to have the characters right in front of you, face on, doing whatever they're doing. You want to see them from different places, and you want to see what's around them and how they fit into a landscape. And it helps with creating atmosphere enormously.
I think one of the things that I really appreciate in your books, the ones that you've written and illustrated yourself, is that they are books that, in my experience, children want to read. So a question about whether you have children in mind when you create the book, whether you're trying to present a child's eye view of the world, or are you just trying to connect with your own childhood?
Well, I don't have any children of my own. I have some stepchildren. And I think the only way I can do it is by connecting with my own childhood. And I think most of the stories that I write are, especially Blue Kangaroo, they're nearly all sort of childhood injustices that I suffered and remember. And I think that most of my books are about feelings of some kind or another, whether it's feeling left out or feeling you haven't got something that somebody else has, or feeling afraid of something. They're nearly all emotions and feelings that I relate to from childhood. And they feel very real. And to me now, still, I can feel all that stuff.
Just to go back to Mister Toots for a moment, we've talked about that as a refugee type story, if you like. But on the other hand, Mister Toots is also a child seeking love from his family. So from a child may not read into it the sorts of things that we've talked about. They might just be feeling that this is wonderful because this is how I want to feel within my family.
Yes, and that you can go away and come back and you're still going to be loved. I think that's a bit of a theme I have as well, which comes into the Plum Dog books about, you can behave really badly and do dreadful things, but you are going to be forgiven and you can come back and your family is still going to be there to love you and protect you.
I wanted to just spend the last little bit of our time together talking a little bit about, obviously, you've got this long time friendship, working partnership with Quentin Blake. And because so many of our listeners are teachers, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what made Quentin such a great teacher.
He was a wonderful teacher. He was really good at knowing what you needed, each student. I mean, he used to bring in books that he knew would be the right book for each person. And he just taught me the most basic things, as well as moving me on to the next big thing, kind of. I mean, he taught me about how to do roughs, which I used to struggle with. And he taught me that you do them very small, very, very small, and then you blow them up. But if you did them small, you generally got everything in the right place. Much, much easier anyway. He also taught me how to work on a light box. He taught me how to choose the right paper to work on, because they're so different, all the kinds of papers that you can use, and different things happen with different paints, the way it absorbs it and so on. And he's been just a fantastic support ever since. He was terrifying when he looked through my portfolio, because he never used to say anything. He'd stand there in silence, watching him leafing through with no expression and no words. But then at the end, he always said something pertinent, just right. And he wrote the 3 Little Monkeys for me when I was sort of starting out. But I had just managed to write a book myself about monkeys, which was being published by Anderson Press. And so I didn't do it. And it got put in a drawer. And it was just like about, I suppose, 5 years ago that I fished it out again. And HarperCollins took it and there it is. And there are now 3 of those books and a 4th to come.
I want to just take a few points from what you've said there about the qualities of teaching, because I think they're things that we could all think about. That idea of putting the right book, the right thing into somebody's hands. You can do that if you really get to know your pupil, your student as a person. So you're connecting with them in terms of what they need. And then you said something else that I think is really important for teachers, because that's silence. Sometimes we can say too much. Sometimes it's better to say less.
No, exactly. I did teach myself actually for a while at Middlesex Polytechnic, and I was teaching 2nd year students, and there was no structure. You just had to go and find them in the studio, and then you'd look at their portfolio. And I had the silence when you're looking and you're trying to think what to say, and then something comes. Suddenly you know what it is. But it's very difficult. I think teaching is the most difficult thing in the world, to know when you're being useful and when you're just interfering and irritating somebody.
Emma, I absolutely love Mister Toots, and it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me in the Reading Corner.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you for having me. It's been great.
In the Reading Corner is presented by Nikki Gamble and produced by Alison Hughes. This episode is generously sponsored by HarperCollins Children's Books. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review. If you would like to find out about other events and courses, visit justimagine.co.uk. Join us again in the Reading Corner on your favourite podcast platform.